Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Charlene Marira and I'm a relationship manager with Turn Left Media based out of Kenya, Nairobi. Good afternoon. As many of you may know, Turn Left Media is exclusive media partner for LinkedIn in Sub-Saharan Africa. We know content matters, but how do we make sure we're producing content that will engage? In this webinar, LinkedIn and marketing experts will share the proven content strategies that they use every day to create knockout marketing plans. Here's a sneak peek into the strategies that they will go through today. 1, show, not tell, ways to deepen your hook and create show-stopping content. 2, quality over quantity, best content practices for different audiences. And 3, and lastly, further your reach with LinkedIn, tips and tricks for optimizing your LinkedIn marketing campaigns. In 2021, to help B2B companies understand the impact of thought leadership, Elderman and LinkedIn surveyed 3,593 global businesses and business executives across a wide range of industries and company sizes. To help us unpack the learnings and opportunities of this amazing piece of research, we're bringing Tusa Barik to your screens today, all the way from New York City. Tusa Barik joined LinkedIn in 2017 to lead agency and partner marketing efforts where his team focuses on enabling and engaging agencies and partners to help their clients exceed their marketing goals and drive sustainable growth. He is focused on developing and executing the agency and partner go-to-market efforts for LinkedIn marketing solutions and developing thought leadership to help customers achieve success. Tusa has over a decade of experience in advertising, marketing, and ad tech on the agency client and consultant sides. Tusa, before we start, in the true LinkedIn fashion, tell us something that's not on your LinkedIn profile already, or something you're reading or watching or listening to at the moment.
Great. Hi, Charlene. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm very excited. I should have known there'd be some sort of icebreaker, and I did not prepare, of course, for that. So I will actually tell you something about that I'm watching right now. I'm recently very much got into this Netflix series, Formula One Drive to Survive, F1. I was not a Formula One fan. I knew very little about it until about last year. 3 of my friends were all trying to convince me to watch the show. I was like, I just can't commit to another show. I have too many things I'm watching. And then I started watching season 1, and I just fell in love and watched the entire thing in 2 weeks. So I was super excited that the new season came out, watched it all before the latest season of Formula One started, and was able to finish it all before the race last week in Bahrain. I'm excited for Saudi Arabia that's coming up this weekend. So that's what I'm currently watching right now.
Amazing, and great to hear that we have another Formula One enthusiast in the building today. So thank you so much for your time today, and over to you to give us your presentation.
Perfect. Thanks again for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk with you all around the research we've done. As Charlene mentioned, my name is Tusa Barik. I run agency and partner marketing for LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. I am based out of our New York City office, as she mentioned. I actually reside a little bit away from New York. I'm down in the Princeton, New Jersey area, so about an hour away. I was born and raised here, so they have a saying about New Jersey in America that once you're from here, you can't get away from it. So I'm back here after living in New York for a while. But it's amazing to be here and talk about the research that we have done. Let me pull up the research right now so we can walk you through it. Just give me 1 second. This is the magic of a live stream and how it goes. So I'll share this, and then let's pop this up. And hopefully you all can see my screen. So as Charlene mentioned, we are here to talk about the 2021 B2B Thought Leadership Impact Study. We do this every year it's been 4 years that we've done it with our partners at Edelman, which is a global PR firm that helps a number of clients in various industries around the world. The reason we've done this research, and we started about 4 to 5 years ago, was we felt that there wasn't a lot of great research at the time around B2B and thought leadership and the impact that it can have, both from a brand awareness factor, but all the way down to actual sales that happen in B2B. And so we started doing it again 4 or 5 years ago. And for this year, we were able to really expand where we went and did a global study to talk about and understand how thought leadership can impact the sales process in B2B, but also just brand perception and awareness. So in terms of, I'll go through some quick learnings and what we're seeing in market, how we're understanding what's going on, and then I'll go into detail on each of these things. So first, the first thing we saw was there is, because of the pandemic, in the past couple of years, we saw there's a glut of content that's been created. A lot of content has been created and made available digitally, but the problem is there's a large number of that is low quality. And so that can really dilute the perceived value of what the thought leadership is around B2B decision makers. Second, what we found was that even with that said, it remains critical to engage customers, and breaking through the noise is really hard, but when you do, there's success that can happen. Third, something that's come more and more in this world and this landscape that we live in is that with decision makers in particular, strong thought leadership can really help earn trust and credibility, particularly if you're new to a market and not an established market leader. Fourth, what we found was that we wanted to understand how to make sure that thought leadership is high performing. And what we found is it's something that needs to be both authoritative and provocative, yet remain human in tone and even fun at times. And fifth, given the amount of competition that's out there for attention and a large amount of content that's been created, along with shifting buyer preferences, it's really important that you take the time to reevaluate whether your strategy is making sense to meet your customer needs. So before we go in too much into the actual report, I want to just clearly define a couple key things we looked at in this report and some terminology. So when we say thought leadership, what we mean is pieces that refer to content that are not sell sheets. So things like this: research, reports, webinars, videos, essays, things that are available for free to a public or in return for registering for something, and making sure that it's not a sell sheet of any sort, but really explaining something that's going on in the industry and helping people better themselves to understand how that works. In terms of the audiences that we surveyed in this report, it's what we call B2B decision makers. So those are people who have consumed thought leadership and are involved in recommending or even making the final decision when choosing to purchase a good or service for a B2B company. We also did do a cut, and we'll talk about final decision makers, those people who actually make the final signature or say, yes, we're going forward. But as you know, in B2B, there is not typically just one person. It's a group of people in a committee that's deciding. So important to understand all the decision makers in the that are making a decision and factoring into it. And we also did a cut around C-suite executives. So understanding people who are either complete or partial owners or in the C-suite to understand how their perception worked. In terms of that, we surveyed almost 3,600 folks globally to be able to get a wide variety of seniority levels, from the C-suite down to people who are actually working on things day to day, and a variety of company sizes. It was done about mid last year in about 10 to 15 minute survey to be able to understand across the world how people were feeling about thought leadership that they were consuming and making decisions based on it. I will note we surveyed in a number of different countries, and we always typically get the question, well, how is it different in my particular country or in my region? Regardless of the cut we do, the same story is told around the world. And so I think it's important to note that although we always see nuances in individual countries as it relates to B2B marketing and thought leadership, there tends to be some common themes that we saw, and that's what this report talks about. So the first thing I talked about was this large amount of low quality thought leadership that came out. So I want to dig into that a little bit. As you can imagine, as you probably know, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of thought leadership that's existed. And of all the decision makers we surveyed, 2/3 said that they just received an insane amount of thought leadership that they've seen since the pandemic came. And about 40% of that are saying that they're just oversaturated with content. There's just too much that that they're seeing, and they just can't manage it. So it's really hard to be able to break through the noise with so much going on there. That all said, over 50% of the C-suite is saying that they're spending more time than ever consuming thought leadership. And 54% of all decision makers said they spend at least 1 hour a week reading and reviewing thought leadership. The reason they do this, and a large part of this time, is spent to be able to just better themselves and understand how can they know more about what's going on about a particular topic, area, as it relates to the work that they're in and what their company is trying to do. That said, because of the low quality that has happened, and 71% of decision makers say that at least half of the thought leadership they had is not as insightful as they would like it to be. And so that can really dilute the perceived value of your company if you're trying to create thought leadership from a marketing perspective that can help earn credibility and trust, and be able to show that you're a thought leader and a market leader in the area that you're talking about. Second, with all that said, it's really critical to be able to engage, given that the time consumption continues to go up year over year, and how much time people spend reading and consuming thought leadership, and the amount of thought leadership that's created. For a quality customer engagement, breaking through the noise is really important, but it's tough to do. And we're seeing that across the world, right? Regardless of this report or others, there's not a direct engagement with B2B purchasing that doesn't include a number of different things that happen. Buyers typically engage with a service provider or seller much later in the buying process. Typically, 80% of what's happening in a Gartner survey shows that there's research happening before any decision or any contact is even made with the company. And they're always looking for content as a new way of working, as they think about the different ways to interact, whether it be remotely or digitally. That it's really important to be able to evaluate on their own. And more are thinking about self-service transactions. How can we spend less time talking to an individual and make decisions ourselves and work with that? So thought leadership is something that can help, again, be that branding tool that customers and decision makers can use to understand what's going on. When it's done well, it can really influence a brand perception and buying behavior across the purchase funnel. So in a previous year, we had done when we did the study. So in 2020, when we had done it, we had looked at the different areas of the purchase funnel, and across the board, whether it be from being invited to bid on a project, actually winning the business, increasing the amount of business that was done with the organization, or even upselling. Across all those factors in the buying cycle, there was a significant amount of influence that thought leadership had in that. So we were able to see that it's not just a brand awareness play, but it's also all the way down to a conversion and upselling that happens with thought leadership. And what we saw is very much so, decision makers are using thought leadership to stay educated on the trends of what's going on, what's affecting their industry, what's affecting their business, and they're using it to generate new ideas. As you can see on the various stats on here, I'll highlight a couple. Over 70% are using thought leadership to stay up to date with what's going on in their business. They're 68% are thinking about how do we think about future trends to be able to decide what our future strategy is as a company. And they're using other companies' thought leaderships to do this. And that goes to that 65% that are using those trends to really think about the future plans for their business and what that means. That all said, because of the large amount of content that's out there and just general daily changes of how we interact with content and being surrounded all the time with news and information, attention spans are very short. If you're not piquing the interest of a buyer within the first minute, they'll move on. That's what over 50% of our respondents said. And a lot of times people will file away the thought leadership to revisit, but over 55% or 56% so they never actually get back to it. So you really want to make sure you can pique interest in a way that's short tidbits, but intrigues them to go in at that moment to be able to learn more and more. And when it comes to quality, what we're seeing is that most of the B2B thought leadership lands in the middle. So of our decision makers, 15% rated thought leadership they saw as either very good or excellent, and 30% said it was either mediocre, poor, or very poor. So there's a lot of room for improvement to be able to get into that top 15%. How do we think about creating content that can really provide some sort of opinion that helps drive business decisions, strategy, and most importantly, drives customer value for who you're trying to reach. The next piece is around earning trust and credibility. For those of you who know Edelman, trust is a big piece of the work that Edelman does. They do an annual trust barometer around the world to understand trust in business, trust in government, trust in the media landscape. And so we wanted to dig in a little bit here to understand how does thought leadership help in B2B, particularly as people are thinking through what strong thought leadership can do with trust and credibility. What we really found that was interesting was beyond just overall halo effect of having quality thought leadership, if you're not established in a market or the market leader, quality thought leadership can have a big impact to be able to help do that. So talking about this idea of gaining recognition as a challenger, almost 2/3 of buyers told us that the thought leadership they read had helped them understand a new company or a new category where the brand wasn't someone they had thought about in the beginning. They just hadn't really entered the market and knew all the players, and decision makers were able to use thought leadership to identify the competitive landscape of who they wanted to talk to figure that out. It also, almost 60% of those buyers say that it really built the brand awareness and was the most important factor when they were doing that. So what we're seeing is, particularly whether you're new or you're small or you're trying to take on a big market leader, thought leadership can have an impact that can really be able to figure out how to get there and get it out there. And what we saw was that almost 50% of buyers say thought leadership ultimately led them to not just discover, but purchase from a company that was not considered previously. So we wanted to make sure that this was true in real life. And what we did is we interviewed a couple clients on both the Edelman side and LinkedIn, and we found that, and you can read more about these quotes later when we send the report out after the recording, but you can see that even a company with Shell, which is known around the world, their aviation industry group was really working to figure out how do we make sure that we're seen in the industry as being ahead of the curve and understanding where the market and the world is going. And they were able to use thought leadership to really push that agenda in the world. In terms of helping to change perception of a brand, and this really falls with them as well, thought leadership can help that along with repairing reputation. So almost 2/3 of buyers said that thought leadership was able to significantly change the perception of a company for better because of a piece. And almost 50% said they used thought leadership they had found was a way to help repair a reputation of a company that might be in some controversy, to be able to help rebrand and rework through that. Ultimately, what this does is this leads to earning trust and credibility, right? So again, what we were able to see is beyond just assessing capabilities, it's really, that's what sales sheets are for. That's what sales documentations and marketing materials are for, is capabilities of a company. Thought leadership is a level above, where it's really just showing that, as a B2B company, we are thinking about the industry as a whole and how we are leaders in that and how we can help. And so I think this is really important to remember, because it goes back to the original point that I was making, that in a purchase cycle in B2B, there's not one person making a decision. One of the things we talk about a lot is this idea of a purchase in B2B is actually a very emotional purchase. People don't think about that, but when you're making a decision to buy a multi-million-dollar or even multi-$100,000 commitment to something, that's your career on the line. That's your decision-making that's being put out there. And so making sure that you're buying from a company that you can trust and feel will deliver for your organization and is a representation of you is really important. So this idea of trust and credibility becomes increasingly important in using thought leadership to be able to make sure that people feel comfortable with their purchase decisions. Again, another example of a customer that was able to see how the value of thought leadership does provide an ability to help with their help how they're perceived in the market. The other piece of this is actually interesting. One thing we saw is across the world, as social media, as there's a number of different types of news outlets out there. Newsrooms across the U.S. are shrinking, but that's also seen across the world. And COVID dominated news cycles have also changed a lot of what media tends to cover. And so what we found is in B2B that over 50% of buyers said they actually use thought leadership as an important way to draw attention to topics that the news doesn't cover. So, it's not, when you're not getting coverage, you have to figure out ways to get the word out there. And thought leadership is a way to talk about your industry that might not be covered in the news typically. And then the other thing I would be remiss to not mention is recruitment. So over 50% of buyers said that thought leadership can be important in attracting the best talent. Something we call talent brand. As you think about like wanting to attract people and figure out who can make the most impact to get people in the organization, and especially as it becomes more and more difficult to hire, having thought leadership is a branding play from an internal perspective of trying to get people to know more about your business and want to apply. The fourth thing is around figuring out what is good thought leadership and how do we find the right balance of being both informative, authoritative, provocative, but people really want a human tone and they actually want some fun too, right? Especially with so much out there, it's important to figure out how do we differentiate, how do we make sure that that we're finding a way to be able to get people's attention. So, what we found is almost 90% of buyers said they wanted thought leadership that was both intellectually rigorous and fun to consume at the same time. When you're reading something, it's really important that you take the moment to relate and remember that everyone is a consumer at the end of the day. Everyone's got a ton of different things they're consuming and reading and getting their information from. And so you want to make sure that you're able to find a way that it's both smart and enjoyable. One of the key things we saw was it's important to be authentic and have a point of view while delivering something of value, because thought leadership has often been a one-way broadcast, but it's actually a two-way community and conversation that happens or that can happen. And so it's important that you try to play into that. And understanding what your customer needs are and talking about those. People always ask, like, what are the types of things we should do? It's something that should be very unique to your organization. Even if you're in a crowded space, what is that unique play that you can take on it to be able to provide decision makers a unique perspective? In terms of that human, personable tone, it's really important. Over 60% of our decision makers said they wanted a more human, less white paper version of how we talk. And it's important to have a point of view and really an identifiable author. Over 2/3 of our respondents said, it's one thing to come from a company, but it actually means a lot more when there's a human name and face that can attach to the actual content to make it feel more human and real. And don't be afraid to be provocative. It's important that you have a stance. What we saw was that you want to be able to challenge your customers' beliefs to help them think a little bit differently. That's what over 80% of our respondents wanted, and I really felt that. It's also really important to not just make it about what you were saying, but also include third-party data and insights from others. Over 80% of people wanted this. It's why even in this, you'll see we reference not just ours, but we reference other data that's out there to make sure it shows that this is consistently seen across different mediums of what's going on. And the most important thing is be original and don't be salesy, right? When you make it about your products, it no longer is thought leadership. It's important to have original ideas, and it's important to make sure you're talking about the industry or the topic as a whole, and not make it about how your product can help them in that point. That's further down the line that someone on your team can talk to them or your marketing material exists to be able to do that. And then finally, it's important to remember that one size does not fit all. Given the amount of content that is out there, it's really important to provide insights that help people perform their day-to-day job better. That's mostly what they want to see, and they want content that they can read easily in different formats. The majority do want to be able to read key pieces of it, but they want to be able to dig in deeper in different formats, the way that makes sense for them. So I'll finish up with talking about like it's really important to think about your thought leadership strategy in a way that meets your customers' needs. And if you're just constantly doing the same thing over and over, it's probably important as the world has changed, as we all know in the past couple of years in particular, to rethink and take a closer look on how thought leadership can be used as a way to stand out from a crowd. Again, after this, I'm sure you'll see the recording, and we can send this out around a checklist of a couple key ideas we have of how you can think about your thought leadership and reevaluate to make sure that you're thinking about it in a way that drives the most impact. So with that, I'll thank you all for your time for listening to me on the report, and I will stop my screen share and pass it back on to Charlene.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tusa. Those were some great insights and comments. And as you can see from the audience, they are fully excited and engaged on what you have shared with us. So thank you so much. Now, to lead our panel discussion, I'm handing it over to my colleague, Sam Oliver, Director of Operations for Turn Left Media. Hi, Sam. Over to you.
Thank you, Charlene. It's so great to be here today and engage with this dynamic panel. So now for a quick round of introductions. You obviously all know the amazing Tusa already, but we're also joined by 3 other panelists from Deloitte, Sasol, and MediaCom. So first, I'd like to introduce Anoka Balram. Anoka is currently the Chief Marketing Officer and Applied Design Capability Leader at Deloitte Consulting Africa. She brings a combination of manufacturing, advertising agency, and professional services experience with a particular focus on digital customer experiences. Anoka has also worked with multiple clients, specifically in the consumer goods sector. Next, we've got MJ Khan. He heads up Group Digital Communications at Sasol. MJ is a PRISA accredited PR practitioner, an academic, an award-winning strategist, bookmarks judge, keynote speaker, and gherkin connoisseur. So I look forward to hearing about that one, MJ. He is also responsible for social media and digital campaigns across 23 countries that Sasol currently operates in. And he has also received numerous awards and is part of the Golden Key Honor Society. One of his proudest achievements is building Sasol's LinkedIn presence into the largest corporate page in Southern Africa and using it as a platform to celebrate his colleagues and tell the Sasol story. And then last but not least, we have Navasha Pillay. Navasha is the head of digital and systems acceleration at MediaCom. And as a highly skilled marketing specialist, Navasha's professional foundation has always been centered on people. After almost a decade in client industries such as telecoms, banking, FMCG, and automotive, she decided to sharpen her understanding of behavioral marketing. Nova also has worked across multiple B2B and B2C client brands and has a keen eye for detail and picking up nuances in behavior across marketing categories. She has a passion for the industry and is constantly looking to build and mentor and assist in driving transformation. So wow, panelists, I feel completely honored to be sharing the screen with you amazing folks today and excited for the conversation we're about to have. So I think in 30 seconds, Anoka, Niv, MJ, can you tell us something that's not on your LinkedIn profile or something that you're listening to, reading at the moment? MJ, we'll start with you because I'm dying to hear more about this good knowledge.
Thanks so much, Samantha. Well, to find out more about the gherkins, I think that's a separate conversation. So that's a little hook so that we can continue this later. But in terms of what's consuming me right now, so my wife, toddler, and I are in love with a Disney movie called Encanto. Absolutely beautiful. My favorite movie of 2021. Really love the songs, the music, and understanding just the thinking behind the composition. And as those who watch the movie know, we don't talk about Bruno. No, no, no.
I love it. Niv, what about you?
So I'm currently reading a book by Nassim Taleb, and it's called Fooled by Randomness. And I think it's something that is so awesome. It's completely changed my perspective. But I think that the key thing for me that stands out about the book is that you can do everything right and still fail, or you could do everything completely wrong and actually win. And it's been something that's been pretty thought-provoking for me, just to like break down the own barriers that I had in my head about how things should be.
Sure. That's awesome. Thanks. And Anoka?
So I'm listening to an app. It's called Mind Valley, and one of the master classes I've attended and I'm still listening to is on how to have out-of-body experiences. So often the concept is very much about how we limit it to our physical body, and so we can push ourselves to the total fitness challenge by being physically fit. But then this really does test the energy frequency and how in the physical body that we can still experience another life form through the energy and can go right back into speaking to loved ones of the past.
Wow. Well, it's so good to hear from all of you and get to know a little bit more about you. But let's jump straight into the questions. So, Tusa, this one is for you. So, from a global perspective, how has thought leadership really shifted post the pandemic?
Yeah, so we've seen just a tremendous, as I talked about, there's been a tremendous amount of thought leadership that's created, but also just such a focus on digital now, right? Like we're all somewhat working from home or from space, from different spaces, and there's constantly things that are coming up from a personal or professional aspect that you're working on. And so what we're seeing is this truly digital transformation that has happened in the past 2 years, and I think the running saying is like we've seen about 2 decades worth of transformation happen in 2 years, right? And so the way that people are consuming, distributing content is so much more on a focus on how do you reach someone in a place where you don't know they are. Traditionally, the typical B2B marketplace would exist a lot around events, around in-person meetings and things like that. And so from a distribution perspective, it's become so much more focused on the digital side and how to think through how that works. Also, I do want to apologize. I think one of my cameras went out midway through my presentation, so just was able to get it back. But hopefully everyone was able to hear the presentation okay.
No worries. Thank you, Tusa. That's so insightful and so relevant to all of us. MJ, this question's for you. So less than half of thought leadership consumption provides valuable insights according to this research. Why do you think that is?
Well, geez, just to zoom in on a few things that I think Tessa sort of mentioned as well. You know, we're having a conversation around low quality and complaints around low quality, but truly, when we think about low quality, is subjectively it just means low value. And if people are seeing no value in what they're consuming, then they're going to switch off. They're going to move away. So I think there's a few reasons for that. Potentially, maybe some of the content is very self-serving. And people sense that it becomes too salesy. They don't want to engage with that. They've got different methods of engaging with sales content, so that's not going to appeal to them. The other thing we need to consider as well is, I mean, when you have a pandemic like COVID, you look at budgets being cut, right? So it's marketing spend, it's HR spend, all of that, and then that means that you're potentially delivering poorer quality products, you know, whether it's thought leadership and you don't have the budget to do really cool creative, to research it as much as you want to develop it as much as you want to, and you're competing with the entertainment industry that can just capture people, you know. Often when we say, you know, people's attention is 8 seconds long, I laugh at that because I can watch an hour of Game of Thrones and not blink. So, you know, it's just about what value are you getting out of it. And then I guess to the earlier point as well is, are we too scared? Are we trying to conform too much? Are we not being brave enough because we don't want to put ourselves out there as organizations? We don't have a stand or a position on something because we're scared of being bullied, as opposed to saying, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in, and we own it and we play in that space, regardless of what noise we might get from vocal minorities.
Yeah. Thank you, MJ. Niv, you're in quite a unique position today, giving us, an agency lens on thought leadership. So, as an ROI client-oriented business, how do you prepare your clients for this new world where building a TVC or banner ad just isn't enough anymore?
Yeah, I think that's a really difficult one to answer, actually, because there's no right or wrong answer. So I think as an agency, what we've done is we focused very heavily on education and making them understand the power of influence that using influencer media can have, but in relation to the rest of the media that's currently available. I think what's hard and what's difficult for a lot of brands is that everything's happened so quickly, they haven't had time to adapt. So like how normal media evolved, we went from TV into radio into other platforms. Yeah, you've suddenly had so much happen so quickly. It's quite hard to understand like what is the power of something. So what we've tried to do and make sure that our clients understand is how the different channels work together, and try to find the similarities in it in order to bring everything closer together.
Awesome. Thank you, Niv. And then, Anoka, as a CMO at a consulting firm, your content is directly aimed at the Edelman Research Panel audience. So how do you approach the creation process of thought leadership?
Thanks, Samantha. So what we found is that everyone wants to sell something, and it's very much a one-way push approach. And we've seen far too much capability selling. We're seeing influential subject matter experts, and everyone thinks they have bleeding edge capabilities, but relevancy is lost when there isn't an outside-in view. So the approach we take at Deloitte is really to understand the heart of the matter issues that are keeping our leaders up awake at night. So by leaders, I mean our business leaders. And we segment them into personas. So is it the C-suite we're talking to? Is it the senior manager, the middle manager, or the junior manager that's just recently joined the company? And we create content types based on what are keeping them up at night, based on their consumption habits. So to give you an example, during COVID, the content was all around respond. So it was around, safety of the workforce and optimization, to revenue protection and growth, cash preservation and scenario modeling. Then there was also the recover phase of COVID. So the content was very much around cost reduction and virtual workplace productivity or talent retention. And that was all around resilient enterprises. And then there's the thrive phase, which is post-COVID world and how to stimulate demand and the innovation and growth agenda. And most importantly, through the great resignation, redefining the employee value proposition. And we also found that the different areas of our personas will look for content in different environments. So the C-suite, we refer to him as the guru. He's discovering news on or content on news sites and professional networks, while the senior manager, being the critic, is looking for journals and case studies, and he's looking at innovation consultancies and social media. While the middle manager, the devil's in the details, she's the devil detail, looking for frameworks and reports and case studies. And then the junior manager is very open to learning. So they're looking at social media, news and magazine sites, and looking for blogs and article features. So we've defined a very deliberate approach to how we land content in the business to business world, also taking us away from the noise and the clutter that's out there on capability sell.
Wow, thank you. That's so insightful. MJ, I want to come back to you. So petrochemicals and all the areas of Sasol are sometimes incredibly niche. So how do you build on accessibility in the business's thought leadership?
Great question. So I think what's really important, and it's often a conversation we don't have a lot, is what are the fundamentals? What are the contexts? What are the objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And often we start with thought leadership. And thought leadership isn't an objective. Thought leadership is a means to something else. It's an execution. It's a tactic. And often when we look at what we're trying to do, especially if you look at the B2B space that we operate in for some of our products, if there's just about 30 or 40 companies around the world that require that sort of service, are you going to go with a sort of spray and pray approach and then hope everyone's going to download something? Or are you going to build an interpersonal relationship? Are you going to go and understand that business's pain points and then see how you can add value? And part of the challenge now is, I think, especially as communication experts, is we are so fixated on trying to prove the value of communications, is to say communication works, as opposed to saying, what value does communications add to your business objectives? What are your business challenges? And how is communications going to add value to that? So I think, when it comes to something like the niche products, that just have a smaller market, it's less about saying what thought leadership do we need and more about saying what are those customers' pain points? Can we offer something compelling? Can we offer something personalized? And can we do something really remarkable so we stand out?
Yeah, some great questions there. Thank you, MJ, and some big truths. Tusa, So we've got some big brands in the room today, which is significantly more reach and power to get their thought leadership in front of the right audiences. But how would you advise smaller or startup brands to generate and compete for their target audience's attention?
Totally. And I think it actually piggybacks off what MJ was just saying, in the sense that, it's not about just the spray and pray approach. It's really about understanding your customer needs and what we call driving customer value. If you're driving customer value, that's the most important thing you can do. And it's not just, to be clear, it's not just like responding to them saying, I have this pain point, you need to solve it for me. It's trying to understand strategically, where are they trying to go and how do I help them in this industry do that? So regardless if you're a big organization or a small organization, if you can figure out where your customer pain points are, how you can help them understand where the industry may be going and thinking forward looking like that, that's how you're providing the most value to them. So I think it goes back to what I was saying in the report that we saw around this idea of, just understanding how the industry is going, and going back to this idea of like, business to business is an emotional decision when you're deciding what to purchase, right? It's your career, again, that you're thinking about, how do I help my organization? How do I showcase who I am, what I'm doing, and thinking about that. Again, that's the customer perspective. So how are you as an organization helping them with that data that you're showing them and providing them, and understanding how you can drive their objectives forward and help them fundamentally grow, is how you have to think about it, I think.
Great, thank you, Tusa. And Niv, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that question as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think I slightly disagree with Tusa on that, in the sense that we shouldn't be competing, right? I think that smaller businesses have something different to offer to what a large business does have to offer. And the content that you're putting out on the topic that you're talking about, you're not competing for the same audience. You're engaging with people that are interested in like-minded conversations, but the level and the attention to detail in the content is different. So a lot of the big businesses focus more on the sales angle and selling and pushing a product, right? Whereas where small businesses actually do really well is that they actually push understanding and they share knowledge and they sell because they're sharing. And I think that that's something that like has always stuck with me, is that we keep trying to say that small businesses need to level up and compete with the big businesses. I think they're doing a phenomenal job of just landing their own message and pushing a different angle.
Yeah, no, that is a great point. Anoka, for you, what qualifies as high quality content? And if you have any examples to share, that would also be great.
Sure. So high quality content is content that's insights rich but locally relevant. So, taking global thought leadership and hoping that our audiences locally can do something actionable with it, in some instances is useful because it's industry benchmarking and we can see what is the best out there. But when we really are looking to do an implementation locally, or we're looking to retain our talent, we really need to understand, what are the local insights or cost pressures and distribution pressures or supply chain pressures. Those are all different, parameters or dimensions to look at. So local audience relevance is very important. Then providing our audiences with information they can use in their current role to reframe their opportunity. So whenever they're dealing with a problem, if the content shows how it's been solved elsewhere, that's great. And what has been done in other use cases, that's very useful and helpful. And also industry trends. So to keep the audience or the client very future focused. So this is where we are now, but what do I need to be looking at into the future? Some of the examples that come to mind, if I could really think about it, that I've pretty much enjoyed, and if I could put all of this content together and inform my content strategy, I think it could be very useful. So Harvard, for Harvard content is always very insights rich. It's well researched, it's relatable, it's influential and persuasive. Then if I look at local examples, so Talk 702, for example, Bruce Whitfield, I mean, he's very up to the minute and well informed, interrogates senior leaders, and is all around business results. Then if I look at Discovery and I look at, they have a really amazing influencer strategy with Adrian Gore. He's the CEO, he's very insightful, but there's also leadership presence from their CMO, Feroz, or, their digital leader. RMB is very modern and has a very fresh take on their content. And if I look at who's doing it really well in the consumer brands environment, Distel comes to mind, because they're always telling stories, and they've got video content. I often see this on LinkedIn, where they're actually cutting through the noise and the clutter, and they're making us fall in love with their strategies again. And then when I look at Unilever, for example, they've been very informative around their ESG and sustainability strategies, also helping us fall in love with their strategies, and showing us how they're making an impact in the market. So if I could put that as a recipe into the mixture of content and what is good content, I'd be looking for those examples.
Yeah, those are some fantastic examples. Thank you. And I'd love to actually open this question up to the rest of the panel, if anyone else has any examples that they'd like to share.
Cool. Yeah, I'll jump in. Not necessarily an example per se, but I guess I can throw an example as well. But I think sometimes when we talk about thought leadership, we make it the domain of sales and marketing, and we don't really see the value and the importance of having thought leadership throughout an organization. So earlier, when you asked me about Sasol and specialty chemicals and it being a very specific thing, I mean, sure, that's part of the business. That's a really important part because that's a customer-facing part of the business. But we have thought leaders throughout the organization, whether they sit in HR, whether they sit in supply chain. I mean, I'd like to think that within my space as well, I can contribute towards that. And I see so much value in terms of non-traditional thought leadership that's not maybe so short-term focused around lead generation, around customer acquisition, but more around brand marketing. So when we speak about what's the credibility of the messenger, the identifiable author, I look at a local brand like Standard Bank, and I look at their CMO, Tulani Sibeko, and he's responsible for brand and marketing. Yet for me, that thought leadership he provides, it transcends brand and marketing because it gives me a positive affinity and association with that brand. So I think there's a lot of value in that from a brand marketing perspective that we need to really look into, we need to nurture as well. And then those of us in marketing and in governance and in communication roles need to ensure that we're also doing our job to empower and enable. So if someone does want to provide thought leadership content, and it's not necessarily customer focused, we look at building them up, we look at supporting them, empowering them, making sure that the governance works for them, and we enable them. So that's really important as well. And that's something we try to do a lot at Sasol. And I think a lot of organizations need to think about that. I'm not saying everyone is accountable for lead generation, definitely not. But everyone has a part to play in terms of selling the brand, getting that brand out there, and building the brand.
Great. Thank you, MJ.
Sorry.
I think, and if I can just,
sorry. Go ahead.
sorry. I was going to say, if I can just add in there. So I think it's also about just making sure that, you have different types of content that we're being put out there. So nobody wants to read 100 pages of white papers. Some of us want short, catchy content. And I think making sure that you cater for different mind spaces allows for thought leadership to flow much more easily through different organizations and entities.
Completely. I think just quickly to add on to everything that's being said here, but particularly MJ talking around this idea of being the beyond just sales and marketing, and it's not about lead gen. Completely agree. I think there was a comment actually in the live stream around who is responsible for thought leadership. And traditionally, yes, that falls on sales and marketing in particular, which is important from a brand perspective, how we get out there and what we're saying. But everyone to some degree is responsible. And I mean, that's what we saw in the research is there's a craving to be hearing from individuals from an organization. You represent your organization out there and how you show up and and what you talk about and what you do. And it doesn't have to be, particularly around just the focus area of your particular business, but there's a lot of stuff around to the HR point, around the point of like what's going on in the world, to the point of what's our corporate social responsibility piece that we're doing and how we're thinking about the environment. So there's a lot of different pieces to it that can help.
Awesome. Thank you, Tusa. Yeah, I love that we all have a role to play. So a slightly different question for you, MJ. Would you advise gating thought leadership content, and why or why not?
So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, including all the viewers, I'm going to take the view that gating is some form of system that blocks you from accessing a piece of content without giving up some data, right? So your contact details, and it's very much a lead generation thing. I must say I'm not a fan of that. I do believe that, as brands, if you do create quality content, and if you do if you remain relevant, if you remain valuable, then you don't feel like you need such a value exchange. Because if we think about and just analyze, for example, how many people would give in their details because they want to access a white paper, because that's answering a question in the now, but then they don't necessarily want to get a sales lead, and then in 3 or 4 months' time they're going to unsubscribe from the mails. How valuable was that? So you might be ticking a box and saying, oh great, we've got this amount of emails, but does it really translate into something bigger? And I mean, I'm speaking anecdotally now, but I mean, just from my own experience, if I'm looking for something, I'm looking for it in the moment. There's a deep level of relevance and context there. I'm not looking for someone to upsell it. If it's important to me and I see a lot of value in it, I'm going to keep following it. I'm going to then gravitate towards it. And hopefully then I'd be more primed for that conversation. I think right now, this transactional nature of it, definitely not a fan of it, because it drives the wrong behavior.
Thanks, MJ. Great. Tusa, I'd love to hear from you if you have any different thoughts.
Yeah, no, very similar. So we at LinkedIn as a whole actually did away with gating our content about 4 to 5 years ago for a lot of the reasons that MJ laid out there. And the idea fundamentally is, and it goes back actually to the data that I talked about, right? I think it was 87% of decision makers and buyers don't want to talk to someone yet. Like they're in they want to wait for a while before they have to talk to someone, if they ever have to talk to someone, frankly, and make that decision. And so it's really important to, like, if we're thinking about it, we shouldn't think about it as a lead gen aspect. We should think about it as a brand play and continuing to help the industry grow, where the idea of all like helping others learn about what's happening will inevitably help your company and your brand in the long play. We also have some other research that's done from a group we call the B2B Institute within our organization, where they are really trying to help people understand typically budgets, and the way people think about B2B budgets is they spend the vast majority of their money on lead generation activities. How do I get the most number of names, and what does that look like? We're trying to flip the sort of, our research has shown, it's not just ours, it's several academics in the field have shown that you should actually be spending 60% of your budgets on brand building and only 40% on conversions later down the line. It's really important. I think the actual number is like 64, 30, 36, 200 that should be done. And so what we're finding in that is you have to not only think about like an initial sale right today, but you got to think about 1, 2, 3, 5 years down the line. The person who's the more junior person today will become the decision maker, final decision maker 5 years down the line, and you still need to be relevant for them. So if you're just trying to get them to fill out a form so you can try to have someone talk to them to sell them today, that won't actually go anywhere. You're not helping yourself in that long-term value play.
Oh, Tusa, I'm tempted to get you to repeat that because it's so good. But no, so true. Thank you. We have a question from one of our attendees, Dylan, and it's for Navasha. He asks, as an agency leader, is there a role that thought leadership can play for our businesses, and how do we speak to our work for clients?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. So this is something that I'm actually very passionate about, and it's something that I've started to change within our own organization. But I think something that we need to remember is that everyone consumes thought leadership on some level. And if we're encouraging our teams, and if we're putting out thought leadership that is relevant to the work that we're doing, that the rest of the teams can get exposure to, it opens up additional channels of communication. So something for me that changed drastically during COVID, and I'm sure many of us felt this, is we had over communication because we now could speak to people every single day. but the value of the conversations that we were having became very, very much specific to, can you do this? Can you do this? Nothing became engaging. We didn't have conversations like we would before, where we'd stop and say, I had this brilliant idea. Can you do this? And everything became very high level, very superficial. And I think what we're trying to change as an organization is to start sharing thought leadership at different levels so that people can consume it and take it and use it. So we always talk about sharing knowledge and how do we share this knowledge. And I think what Dylan's saying is like, how do we show our work without bragging to our clients? And it's something that it's a very hard conversation to have, right? Because anything that an agency does comes across as, oh, they're bragging about the work that they did. But I think there's a lot of little nuggets and there's a lot of things that we're trying to share in order to educate more than we are doing it to brag. So we're trying to empower people, and it's a strategy that we as a business feel very strongly about, is educating the people and the teams around us as well as the broader community, so that when we do make suggestions and change strategies, everyone understands why, and there's actually solid data to back up what we're saying because we've got case studies at hand. So I think there's definitely opportunity. I think it's a place that not many agencies or companies play in, to be honest. We share thought leadership on the outside, but internally, we're still really guarded about what we know and what we're sharing. So I think there is a lot more work that can be done in that space.
Thank you, Nev. Sure, we have gone through so many questions and they've been incredible contributions. I'm mindful that we've got 5 minutes left, so I'd love to hear from each of you. If you could give us one secret sauce, super duper quick success tip for helping brands succeed with thought leadership, what is the one thing that you would want to leave everyone with today? And Anoka, we'll start with you.
Sure. We mustn't assume that our audiences are waking up every morning to jump onto our website to read our content. So let's figure out what is going to keep them most engaged. And usually if we have a proof point, either in the form of a success story, which can be a video story with a client, that usually helps.
Amazing. MJ.
Question I ask myself before I create any piece of content or before I support my colleagues with any piece of content, there's always three things. So whatever I create, is it credible? Does it make sense for our brand? Is it sustainable? Because I don't want to do a once-off. I want something that tells a story over time. It needs to have this golden thread. It needs to have a meaningful narrative. And the third question is it valuable to our stakeholders, to our followers, our audience, our customers? And if we can't answer those three questions, we don't pursue that piece of content.
Wow. Thank you for that. Nev, what about you?
I think from my side, it's the human element, right? So am I being human in what I am saying? And am I coming across as a bot? Because a lot of the time, a lot of the content that you come across, everything is so heavily laden with jargon and technical terms that nobody actually understands what you were trying to say. And then you just have a lot of people sharing opinions about fancy words, and there's nothing of substance being shared. So I think for me, it's about how do you tell and how do you share a story in a meaningful way that's going to create engagement and drive people to come back and want to see more of what you're doing. And secondly, how do you just tell an emotive story? Everything doesn't have to be hard hitting. Like you can share a fact without being throwing numbers into everything. Sometimes I think we try and overcomplicate it with the numbers. We just need to take a step back and bring it back the human quality.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nev. And Tusa?
Yeah, I wish I wasn't last because I want to agree with everything that was already said. But I think I would say outside of all of that, the other piece I'd mention is being unique yet authentic. And what I mean by that is, I said, there obviously is going to be competitors in your field that are talking about, and it might be a field that there's a lot of players in, or maybe a few, but when there's a lot, there tends to be difficulties around setting yourself apart and understanding how you can provide a unique perspective that's not just constantly the same thing everyone's saying. I'll give you an example of cloud computing, right? There's a lot of customers of ours that have cloud computing as some sort of service product they offer. We had one in particular that decided, I'm going to go all in on this idea of the entertainment industry and the effect of cloud computing as it's happening on the entertainment industry. And that was their unique factor that they focused on. And it was authentic to them because that was actually their expertise, where a lot of them came from and what they're talking about. And so making sure that you're unique, but in a way that doesn't come across as you're just doing it for the business sake, but you're actually trying to help think about something that you can play in an area that's authentic to your business is really important.
Brilliant. Thank you all. These success tips are great. And I really just wanted to thank you for your time today. I wish we could carry on, but we're running out of time. So I really just want to extend a huge thank you for your time today. I'm sure everyone has gained significant insights to use in their businesses. And I know I want to go back and re-listen to all of this. So just a huge thank you from me. Charlene, I'm going to pass back over to you now.
Sorry, guys, technology. So I was just saying thank you so much to our panelists and everyone who managed to join us today. We truly appreciate you taking the time, and I hope that this session was insightful and that you have some little nuggets to take back home with you. As mentioned before, we will be sharing this recording as well as the presentations done today. And furthermore, we'll also be answering or responding to some of the questions that you had for our speakers, but due to time, you will also receive that shortly after this webinar. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for our next webinar coming up in April. And to keep up with what the topics and the speakers for that, do feel free to engage with us on our company page, Turn Left Media, or interact further with us on our LinkedIn profiles. From Nairobi, Kenya, it's been great hosting you, and have a lovely day. Bye.